was wondering if you could address the role of devotion in romantic relationships.
Depends on the relationship, right? Everybody's different. But their potential is that you are in devotion to your partner. I mean, that's potential there. I mean, you know, I don't like to burden a relationship with the need for it to be devotion, because it's so hard to be in a relationship and have one last. Talk about laying, you know, having to have it be like the ultimate something or other. I don't think that's really useful, honestly. But there is definitely potential in relationship for devotion. I mean, the amount of energy that's there in affection, in bodily contact, sexual energy, all of that combined. I know I'm being vague, but this really depends on the person. So is that good, or do you want more?
Well, I guess I've had some of those feelings in romantic relationships.
Yes.
But then I've also had the feeling
You want to give
that...
them the mic, so
Oh, yeah.
are you going to...
Please do. Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
I was saying I've had some of those feelings in romantic relationship, but I've also had resistance to feeling that, or the idea that maybe I'm imagining that person to be more than they are.
Right.
And that is some kind of a danger zone. And so I guess I'm a little bit divided on the issue.
Sounds good.
So maybe there's nothing else to say about it. But if you had something, I would want to hear it. But if there's nothing, that's fine too.
Well, let's see. Let's see what happens. It really depends on your imaginary sense of who the divine is. So if the divine can be a raging bitch and you still worship her, then you'd go for it. But if you have, you know, that she has to be somehow virginally pure, or, you know, just a tantric goddess all the time, then I wouldn't do it.
That's a good answer.
You know, you let her, you know, if the goddess can have PMS, then you're okay. You know?
Yeah.
But if you're going to be like, well, no, my goddess can't do that, then don't bother.
Fair enough.
Okay?
Great.
Great answer.
You see, for me, this is the thing, the forms, right, are secondary. They're like a skillful means. They're like a means to tap the love. So if you already feel an attraction to a particular form, that's what there is to go with. And that means it can be a human person. You know, if it attracts something out of you, beautiful. Or if it's an image of like Parvati or some goddess image that's beautiful and just touches your heart, or the Buddha, or Krishna, or whoever, Shiva. You can use all these archetypical images, Jesus Christ. If it moves you, if it pulls you. But ultimately what that does is, that's for the sake of the love, is what it is. And the more you amplify the love, the more Jesus is everything and everybody. And then the image can go away. From my perspective, the difference between idolatry and iconography is if your image is transparent or if it's opaque. So if you go, this God is the real God and this is what I'm relating to, then it starts to become an idol. Because any image of the divine is a limitation on the divine, no matter how beautiful. So what do I mean by that is the divine is being all of this, right? So you're learning to fall in love with all of this. You're learning to fall in love with onlyness. This is what devotion is. So at the beginning, you choose something that you love. Now, believe it or not, there's some people who are really strong, kind of, if you've ever seen a Tibetan wrathful deity, or something like Kali, for some people they go, yeah, I love that. That really speaks to me. That really pulls my heart forward. So it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It can be, the old word is awful. A-W-E-F-U-L. Right? So those images also can pull out, awe. And that's also a quality, of devotion to life. But you're using that image initially to get in touch with those feelings. And then they start to extend to everything. So these are emblems for onlyness, for life. For life with a capital L, which includes consciousness, non-separateness, everything. Including you. So this is where it gets very paradoxical. The strangest thing about this kind of devotional relationship that's non-dual, where you both are God and you are worshiping God, is that we can dust off the old emblem from our native traditions.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is the best example of a devotee who's divine. Prays all the time, is total in alignment with his internal guidance, the Holy Spirit or God the Father, whatever, and is following that through his whole life. I mean, that's what the mythology, the Christian myth is. And if you treat it as a myth, as a sacred myth, it can be really useful. It's probably the most charged, scary thing about devotion. When you start talking about Christianity, tell me about Krishna and Hanuman. I can feel safe with that, or the goddess. But don't talk about God the Father and Jesus, because that's like too close to home, and I got beat up by that guy. So that's another thing about devotion, I got to say. A lot of us might need to go through a lot of healing around it. And the very act of devotion may bring up stuff around God and religion. And I beg you to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. To make it your own tradition, to reclaim. It could be something from another tradition, or if you feel moved by Jesus or Mary, to reclaim them too. Because it's really your own divine nature that you're contacting when you do this. And we might be able to salvage some old symbols. Okay, Van, you seating your...
Oh,
you're
well,
next.
if you want to say more...
But have I answered your question?
Yes, well, that was a great question, Doug, thank you. I would have asked that question, but I knew I won. That was a good answer to that.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Oh, but now I ask my question.
Yes.
You were talking about how you use your imagination, devotion as imagination.
Yes.
And I would be interested in hearing you say more about how you're using your imagination with your pieces of paper.
Excellent. When you feel lonely, if you're in love, you think about your lover. It doesn't mean you're going to stop feeling lonely. You might feel more lonely. But you can't help but think about him or her. And it turns you on. It opens your heart. It makes life worth living when you think about them. Thinking about them is called imagination. You're having a picture in your head and it makes you feel different. They can be snoring or having an argument with the cashier. And you don't know. You're in relationship to them. And in that moment, you're receiving their transmission. When you think of your beloved, you feel them. You feel it in your heart. So that's the use of imagination. You can think of whatever deity there is there. I mean, the whole thing of gazing is an act of imagination, because you're suspending the belief that that's a piece of paper for a little while. It really looks like Samuel for a few minutes. It's like you're sitting there, okay, wow, I really feel the transmission. But you're looking at a piece of paper. But you're imagining that it's a little bit more than that. You're imagining that this piece of paper will give me transmission because he said so. So let me do it. So that's imagination. Let me do it. And it worked. In the 70s, some of us who were, remember what it was like to siphon gas. Okay. Remember that? It tastes bad, right? If you do it wrong, it tastes bad. Yeah. So you put the hose and it's lower than the tank, and you suck a little bit. And if you suck too much, the gas comes into your mouth. But you suck, and what happens is you create
vacuum.
Right? Vacuum. A vacuum in the siphon happen, right? That's what imagination's like. It just primes the pump. Then the feeling starts to flow. You don't need it. You can just put it down. Chanting does that. So the kind of chants that I do, they are designed, the Tibetans love this, because, the Indians, they did it for devotion and feeling. And the Tibetans said, well, we also know about chakras. What if we vibrated it as we did it, so we actually vibrate the centers and relax them and open them at the same time we're doing devotion. So it's a double whammy. And you're thinking, in the Tibetan tradition, they have you visualize the deity in front of you as you're doing it. So now you're opening up you're loosening up your energy, and you're singing something devotional, and you're imagining them there, and you just open the whole feeling. And that feeling is Padmasambhava. That feeling is Christ. That feeling is the goddess. So the means is the very thing that you're worshiping. It's all the same thing. That's how devotion is love, and love is what you're after. So you use love to get more love. A really good thing to do, and I usually do this in my workshops, but people are usually primed, but you guys have been doing all kinds of stuff, so it shouldn't be hard. Is like imagine like right now, if you imagine that the room was aware of you. That the ceiling's aware of you, everything behind me is aware of you. Like you're the center of awareness, as if everybody's looking at you right now. Just let that happen with imagination for a moment, and you start to feel the presence of God, or of holiness, or of your own heart. You feel the presence of the beloved. You can just imagine that the room is looking at you, but with your eyes open you can even do it. Does anyone have a sense of that now, that the room is aware of them? Mm-hmm. Pretty strange, eh? There you go. This was a natural state for ancient cultures. It was so easy to cultivate. This is why our ancestors all were into nature, because they felt the trees looking at them. They didn't stay looking. They weren't dumb. They knew that there's no eyeballs on the tree, but they felt the spirits in nature because they were letting themselves be looked at by everything. They didn't have a model that says that's not possible. So imagination too. Like I saw a special years ago. It was a BBC special. I saw it on national television here, the public television. And it's James Burke. And he was talking about how there was a time in the medieval times when people actually thought that there was something called the light of the eyes. And they thought that when you looked at something, there was a light that came from your eyes and shined on it. That's how you saw something. That your vision was a light that would hit objects. And then, they started doing scientific experiments, like during the Renaissance, and they found, your eye is actually a receiver. It's just totally passive and open, and the light is coming from the objects, bouncing off of objects. Because, you can see why they thought that. It's like, well, there's no light coming from the wall's just a wall, it's not the sun. But they didn't realize that the light hits the wall and goes into your eye. So that's what everything is, light bouncing into your eye. So basically, you're receptive. So I thought about this and I realized, there's a way in which we're always in that mode of thinking that it's the light of the eyes that goes on everything. Like I have a sense of like, I'm here and my awareness is going out here and landing on things. That's not really true. Everything is arising in awareness. Awareness is not hitting stuff. But it feels that way because we imagine it's like that. So I thought, well, what if I just reversed that? What if I went, okay, everything's looking at me, it's coming toward me. what would happen then? And well, there you go. That's what happens. And it's another use, it's like the opposite use of the imagination that we don't realize we're doing, that we're doing this. Steve, and then Chesney, and then Vivian. So Steve, was it answered?
It was just kind of tagging on to what Banner was asking about in the way that you use your shrine. So I've got it in my head that you've split it between masculine and feminine, is that right?
Yeah, that's just because Vivian wanted goddesses on her side of the room. So that's what we did. That's the only reason that that's like that. They were all, I used to have them all mixed together, but she said, you know, I'd really like to see some of the goddesses over here and have my own point. I said, okay. And so we did that.
Yeah.
So the shrine room has goddesses on one side and gods on the other. It's kind of like an old Jewish synagogue, you know.
And do you work with specific deities or goddesses for specific issues kind of thing, or areas of your life, or is it just
sometimes
use everybody, get everybody on your side?
Yeah, okay, so my second birth story, if anyone, for those who haven't heard my second birth story, it's long, so I won't go into the whole thing about, you know, why I was in distress and how I was in distress, but something happened in my life where it triggered me into a broken zone. And I began feeling how vulnerable I was and how dangerous it is to be alive and be human. And I remembered the teaching, and I remembered what Daniel had said, and I had been reading books, and I went, oh, I guess rather than resisting this or dissolving it away, because I was into consciousness big time before, and so I would just watch difficult things, and they don't go away. But this time I said, well, but this is real. This is an actual circumstance in my life. This is not just a thought. This is actually, I could actually, and then it actually was about losing my job, and then I felt very vulnerable. I thought I was going to fail a drug test, so I was going to be very shamed. You know, I was a prominent member in my satsang community, not Waking Down, but another one. And I was going to be shamed, and I was going to have to ask my parents for a loan because I didn't have the money, and I just went on and on. And then I just went, shit, I wasn't, you know, I hadn't actually done drugs. And I went, this is not fair. And I know my test was going to probably come back positive. I didn't do heroin, but it looked like I did because I did Percodan, and I didn't realize it had an opiate in it. And I did it to go to sleep 3 days on my day off. So I was like, damn it, this is not fair. And I started feeling how unfair life was. And I used to drive a bus in the city of Seattle, and many times part of your job is to bring handicapped people on the bus. And there were people who it wasn't fair. You know, I had one guy who just broke my heart. He was sitting behind me, and he would talk with me, and he was very, very slow of speech. And he said, oh, I used to work here. We're going through a really nice business area. And he said, I used to work here. Really? And he's saying this very slowly. And he used to take a long time getting up the stairs. And he said, yeah. And I said, really, what did you do? He says, well, I was a high-powered lawyer. One day I was driving my Porsche and the truck won the argument. I was just like, yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, and I just remembered that. And I'm like, anything can happen. I can be walking off this bus, trip, and hit my head. You know, anything can happen, and that really irked me, and I started thinking about it. Anything can happen. So I held on to that thought all day because I thought, this is real. And when I went home, right as I was going to bed, I went in front of my altar, and I realized that a lot of my spiritual work and most of my life was a way to avoid feeling that fact, that anything could happen, that I'm that vulnerable, that we're all that vulnerable, that that's just the deal. And I sat in front of my altar, and I called on every Buddhist deity that was there, every Hindu deity I could think of, God, Jesus, all the saints, the Virgin Mary, both Catholic and Protestant versions. I called on Allah. I called on God as you really are, not the way that I think you are. I said all beings who exist that I don't know about that can help me. Every angel, And I did particularly take the form of a wrathful deity, Vajrapani, somebody who I was trained in doing that in Tibetan tradition. And I said, I want to be here. And I went to sleep that night. The next morning I woke up and I was in second birth. And I didn't do it as an invocation in second birth, I just did it as an invocation to be here. So my second birth is founded in devotion and in invocation. And that's the only. Once in a while I will look in books and say, oh well, this one's a power deity and let's do that one, or this one is more for silence, so let's do that, or the goddess qualities, or, so sometimes. But I think that's a great thing if you're drawn to it, but it's a little bit more magical that way. I'm more, it's just opening the heart and connecting. Padmasambhava is really who I connect with, and I don't know why, but that's why I chant that song. Yeah, he's my chosen deity. Chesney.
I sort of feel like it's silly to ask this now, but it feels like, there's almost this assumption that devotion is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And in this whole conversation we're having, and I'm still this, what is
the value?
The value. And I think you've been talking about that all along, but on just sort of a real basic level.
Love.
Yeah.
Love and trust. It's just a means for further love and trust. Relaxation into holiness. Surrender into holiness. But it doesn't, you can do all of that without devotion if you're so inclined. But many people are so inclined to devotion. There's another piece, for me anyway, that helps with this, for me, okay? And it has to do with the paradox and being a 21st century human being, for me. And that is that there are two perspectives that I have. Two perspectives, and they're both true in their own right, or neither one of them is true, you can say ultimately, because they're both conceptual understandings. And they're contradictory. They have to do with, for me, it's the paradox. They have to do with the core word. They have to do with the both-andness of this thing. One of them is a kind of worldview that is what is the common sense today, which is that consciousness arises from the body. The body is matter. Matter is first. Matter is prior. The universe existed first, and then matter evolved, and then it developed a consciousness. So consciousness is an aspect of the body. So that's one worldview, and I embrace it, especially when I go to the doctor and all kinds of stuff. It's what's normally called objective reality. And the word objective has a charge to it that we don't even realize. It's a 21st century charge. It means real. But if you look at the definition, it doesn't really mean real originally. It just means you look at things as an object, not as a subject. It somehow has become the same in people's minds, just like imagination has become the same as fantasy, like, oh, that's bad. Objectivity, or objective, somehow means realer, because we share it, and we can see something as an object and describe it. So that's real, and that's true, and I live in that world, and I relate in that world, and that's when you want a job, and you want to live, and you want everything that's real. Okay? And then there's this other perspective, which is real also. So from the objective point of view, I was born May 20th, 1959. So how do I know? Because my mother told me. Right? People saw it. But my own experiences, I never was born. I don't remember being born. Sorry. As far as I can remember, it was kind of vague and maybe non-existence, whatever that is, I don't know. And then slowly things came online, like there was lights and shadows and feelings and people in my direction saying, Chris, hi, we love you, or be good, or something, And I kept seeing this and suddenly realized they were pointing at me somehow. I remember when I was a little kid, going to the mirror and looking in the mirror and going, oh, that's who Mommy's talking to. It was really weird. Because I always felt like somebody was talking, they were talking past me. Like, what is it? And then it was like, oh no, they're talking at me, okay. So, because I didn't experience myself as an object. I didn't experience anything as an object. It was all from the subjective perspective. And that was the prior perspective. Consciousness is prior. It's the first thing that every being experiences. It's only when the people, the objective people, talk at you and tell you how things are that you begin to learn how to see things objectively the way they do. Very, very useful for survival of the objective body. But if it was never taught, and you're an infant, and you're still subjective, and the body goes away, do you even have a concept that you died? I mean, what is that? There's no... But the parents, of course, are in mourning, because they see the baby as an object. There is a baby over there, and it just died. So, the subjective sense is the place of devotion. And it's the place of consciousness being prior. You can't really say consciousness is prior and eternal from the objective sense. If you look objectively, you can't find God, you can't find spirit, you can't find consciousness, you just find brains and stuff. In other words, you look at the body as an object, those bodies, and they dissect, they don't find any consciousness. It's like, there's nothing there, just matter. Then that's real, objectively. The thing is that every sentient being lives subjectively first. And dies subjectively last. In the end, I don't know, it's maybe just my imagination, but I seem to have come from nowhere. And here we are, talking, right? And here I am. I don't know how I got here. I'm just here, it arose, there it is. I know this is objective reality, that I was born and I learned that game and I talked that whole thing, and that's real in an objective sense. But my own experience, experientially, is that I came out of nothing, out of I don't know where, or what it is. And it seems to me that that's probably what will happen when I die. I'll go back into I don't know what. In nowhere, whatever. I don't know that I'll die. I just think that the same way the lights came on slowly and the sound came on slowly, that'll happen slowly, or maybe all at once. So, and by the way, for those who wonder about reincarnation, the best thing I ever heard was from Alan Watts about reincarnation. He said, look, I mean, he went through kind of speaking about this kind of thing too, like, it comes on and everybody sort of just comes into being, piece at a time, out of whatever, and seems to go out. And he says, isn't this weird? I mean, what the hell are we? I mean, this is really weird. We just exist. Come out of what? We don't know. Go back into we don't know. That is really weird. There doesn't seem to be any good reason for it. It's just strange. And then he said, why is it stranger if it should happen twice? I mean, here you are being nothing, suddenly you be this, and then you be nothing again. Why would it be weirder 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 1,000 times? It wouldn't be any weirder. It's just weird, period. Whether it's once or a million times. It's kind of unbelievable, period. So, I don't know. Is that helpful?
I kind of want to go back to the imagination and devotion to an object. And my experience of devotion has been to an object that's a guru,
yes,
that's living.
Yes.
And I still long to have that relationship. with a living deity.
Yes.
I mean, living human.
Yes.
And I feel that I'm kind of finding that. But at any rate, my question around it has been in the past, my imagination of that human living guru
Yes.
provided me with all of the things you've described of imagination of a piece of paper or metal or wood.
Yes.
And except for that, I'm dealing with a living human being.
Yes.
And that living human being comes with all the imperfections of humanness.
Yeah.
But in my imagination, the human part is not what brings about that only, I mean, so far,
Yeah.
is not what has brought about that feeling of onlyness or that feeling of oneness or that feeling of bliss that comes from the imagination of a human guru that in my past.
Yes.
And so then when the human guru, I become closer and closer to the human guru, and the humanness becomes more observable. I mean, like, my imagination just isn't able to deny the humanness
Yes.
of the guru.
Very well. Yeah.
Then it's like...
It's like your guru has PMS.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah,
So it's
like-
the same thing as a lover,
Exactly.
I guess.
Mhm.
And then it's like, you know, and I throw out all of my experience, but my experience itself must have been real, too.
Right. Good. Good catch.
So I don't know where I want to go with this, but somewhere.
That's good. I like that. That's good. And maybe you can keep the mic, and I'll just people can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is great. I love this. This is why, from my perspective, it's only safe to be in devotion to God. It's not safe to be in devotion to anything that changes. Okay? Now, does that mean that you can't be in devotion to a guru? No. It does. You can be in devotion to a guru, but only provisionally. In other words, for the time being. It's just like 21st century relationships.
That's good.
You know?
Only for the honeymoon part?
Well, no. People go into deep. Doesn't necessarily. Well, that's when if you're going to be superficial with your God, then yeah. If you want to go deep with your God or your guru, then when the times get rough, you stay.
Yeah.
But you don't let yourself get abused in a relationship just because you say, I'm going through the rough times. No, if there's not mutual commitment, you know, and mutual respect, that isn't a relationship worth having. Now, seeing foibles, basically you have to just reconnoiter your understanding of what the divine is. Because the divine has foibles. I mean, the divine, look at this whole onlyness is divine. It's full of imperfection in its manifestation. And so are humans. I mean, humans are, we're almost, it's kind of ridiculous. We're talking about it as different. Humans are life in the form of human. That's it. I mean, that's what we are. We are living Earth. That's what we basically are. I mean, we are the planet with consciousness, walking around until we stop breathing and then we go back into the earth, right?
Can everybody?
Well, no, that's fine.
Okay.
But this thing about imperfection of gurus, you know, you have to trust. There's a weird. Well, I'll go back to that. You have to trust your own internal guidance. So when you say, "Oh, it was a huge mistake to be with that guru," I hope you get over that at a certain point. But you leave the guru if they're abusive. But you were guided by your inner teacher, by the goddess, by God, by whatever name you want to give it, by spirit, to go through what you needed to go through with that teacher so that you could see, aha, this is useful, this wasn't. And now I move on to the next relationship and I don't find a guy who does that to me. I learned, right?
Right.
So the inner teacher, the inner teacher, the guru, is using these outer gurus to teach you. And it could be for the rest of your life, like you might find a man that you marry and you're there with him forever, or you might find a man that you marry and divorce after 6 months. And it wasn't wrong that you married him and were with him for 6 months. That you learned something. Because as soon as you say it was wrong, then you are actually cutting yourself off from your own guidance. You're creating further mistrust in yourself. It's entirely possible to disagree with something you did in the past and still honor it. So that goes, I mean, you know, so many of us in Waking Down, we come from old guru traditions and we have our wounds. And it was a mistake. In a certain way you could say that, but in another way, no. It was exactly what you needed to go through to get clear enough to move to the next thing.